alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a guest whose show I've been on recently, Katie Salidas. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's always good to have people that I've chatted with, or not chatted with, honestly. It's always good to talk to somebody on this show. On it, I couldn't say it more generically, but that's kind of the point. So, Katie,
it's socially approved social distancing.
Exactly. We're in the age of coronavirus, and you can't. And also there's such a thing as geography, and when you live multiple time zones for people, getting together to do a podcast would be pretty impractical. So the internet, it's wonderful. Anyway, Katie, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the podcast and web series you do, and your books.
Okay, that's quite a mouthful. All right, so my name is Katie Salidas. I am an urban fantasy and paranormal romance author. I also write under the pen name of Rosalind Sparks for more of my naughty stuff, which all of the Rosalind Sparks books are published through Three Furies Press. My books under my regular name, Katie Salidas, are all produced by me. I'm an indie author. I also host and produce the Spilling Ink Show, which runs every Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We do it live on air, so we always invite people to come in, post their comments and questions for our guests, and we try and bring on new guests each week, just basically to talk about what it's like to be an author today. And it's actually beyond just being an author. It's author, it's publisher. We talk to small press publishers, producers. We have a partnership with Go Indie Now. They help sponsor our show, but we're also partners in developing new things. So we talk to publishers, we talk to indie presses, we talk to editors sometimes, we talk to cover artists, anybody who touches the book world in some way, shape, or form, we talk to in Spilling Ink. And then beyond that, I also have an a la carte publishing consultant service that I do, where I work with authors who are looking to put their books together. They may have written the book, but they don't know what to do next. So I help in every step of the publishing process, except for publishing your book. I leave that to you. So quite a bit. Cool. I'm always busy.
That last bit especially is very interesting. I mean, I recently had a friend of mine who is kind of doing the same thing for me. I mean, he doesn't do the full edit necessarily because he doesn't have time for that, and I'm not paying him. He just wanted to fool with my formatting and help me with branding and stuff, which was cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's good to have friends like that. It's good to have all kinds of friends, but that's a particularly useful kind to have when you're in this business.
Well, especially being an indie, you need to have either somebody who's been in the trenches and who knows the process of producing a book to help guide you if that's what you plan to do. Because even though you think indie publishing, self-publishing is like DIY, do it yourself, there's a lot of stuff you can't actually do yourself that you do need to kind of hire out for. Sometimes, editing, that's the one we always say, never do yourself. You are too close to your work. You can never correct your own work. Cover art. If you're not a graphic artist, don't make your own cover. Find someone to do it for you. Internal layout, ebook formatting. There's so many different steps in the process that if you don't know how to do it or don't know where to find someone to do it, you need a little help.
Right. And I can personally vouch especially for cover artist stuff because I do my own covers now. But it took 5 years to learn how to make a decent cover, basically. I'm only really recently getting that right. So, and for a while there, I was kind of hybriding it where I'd design part of the cover and then I'd have someone else do the typography, and that worked well too. But now it's all me, and I'm actually pretty happy with what I'm doing, but I never really had any formal training on that, and I've read a few books, but that's it. And so I'm never that confident. What?
I trust in the college of YouTube. If you need to learn it, you could probably find people putting tutorials up on YouTube.
That is a good call, and I can vouch for. I can suggest. Actually, I can't suggest the channel because I forgot the guy's name. But he had a book about indie. He's an indie author. He does his own covers because he's a cover designer. I forget the. I'll try to remember and put that in the show notes, folks.
There's a site I love to go to. It's a YouTube channel, and I think it's called the Photoshop Training Channel. And this guy is fabulous. He walks every step of the process, teaching you specific things. So like learning how to mask things out, learning how to paint hair, learning how to add highlights and uplighting and neon lighting. And there are so many things he teaches step by step that you could spend weeks on that channel, but you're going to come away with some really good skills.
I think I better do that. I am really trying to up my Photoshop game recently. Anyway, this show is not so much about the Photoshop. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, we could go off on a tangent.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, but got to stay focused to some extent. So you say you write paranormal romance and urban fantasy. That's cool. I write mostly fantasy personally.
Fantasy is a huge umbrella, though. It encompasses so many things. And while I typically say urban fantasy and paranormal romance, I really fall more, I think, into like the speculative fiction, magical realism side than your typical romance kind of led paranormal series. I have a little bit more of the gritty undertones, less of the romance, but there's still some in there.
Yeah.
But I like to focus on, the strong female heroine, how she goes from being the underdog to learning what she's supposed to learn to become the hero of her story. And it usually takes place over several books. It's never done in the first book.
Yeah, and that's good policy in general, especially for an independent author. We do need our series, and that's the thing I've been learning pretty painfully over the course of the last few years as I bounce around and do different books and different series. That's been a bad habit of mine, and I'm trying to buckle down now. I'm very excited about the current series. So
series are fun though because they let you really explore not just the main character, but the side characters, really delve into the world building. I mean, you have time to stretch it all out.
That's a really good point. And I never thought about it in those terms of that there's more time, because frequently I've just written books that are just, huge books, 150,000 words long. And then I feel like I have the time, but it's still not as much as, 5 books in a series. It's nowhere near that, which is interesting.
But then again, you also have readers who like their quick fix, give me something short, sweet, and, the I hate to call it the bathroom read, but that's something to be read in a day or in a few hours so that they can digest it quickly and enjoy a story.
And I think that's really important. I mean, I'm trying to write epic fantasy right now. That's my main genre at the moment. And I think it's interesting because mostly I've noticed that, especially in the indie world, those books don't have to be super long. They can be a normal length book, 100,000 words, 350 pages, something like that. And that's fine. That people like that just fine. And that's actually really kind of a relief for me, because while I write long books, I kind of need to write more books too. So probably shooting for 100,000 or 120,000 is better than trying to go, 200,000 words or make a Brandon Sanderson style, 500,000 word epic, in for
but
one book.
But those books are just as good too. I mean, you find readers for all kinds, and while the indies I think feel the most pressure because our readers are voracious, and because there are so many authors out there, in order to keep your fans constantly coming back, you've got to constantly churn out more stuff for them. And so there's always that feeling of being on the hamster wheel. You can't stop. You got to keep producing. Otherwise, you'll be forgotten because there's 1,000 other books being published every day. Yeah,
well, way more than 1,000. That's the scariest part. There's tons of books being published every day, and it's almost frightening how many just independent books appear on Amazon every hour probably.
Yeah, it's insane.
It's a crazy world we live in. So so you write. You've written a couple series then, right? At least a couple. I'm not sure exactly.
I think I'm up to 6 now.
Okay.
I started with the Immortalis series, which runs 5 books. There's a sister series to that, the Old Town Pack, which is 3 books. Another sister series to that, which is my young adult version of the Wolf Pack, which is the Little Werewolf series. That's 3 books. Then there's the Chronicles of the Uprising. That's 6 books. I did a joint authored series called Running from the Devil. That's 3 books. And then my current series is the Agent of Asset series, which is I'm on the 5th book right now.
Nice. That first one, Immortalis, it sounds like you got a whole mini universe there. You got 20 books now at this point.
Yeah, in a way it is. It's kind of like my own MCU.
There's something really neat about that too. I especially single author works that are so spanning. They've got a large variety of different things going on in that universe at this point. That's really neat to me, as someone who doesn't have that going on so much.
It's fun to be able to explore different characters. So in the Immortalis series, I followed one character, But then when I branched out and I wanted to look at the werewolves versus the vampires, I wanted to start looking at, well, what packs do they belong to and what characters are within those packs. So I have the older one, which is more of your paranormal romance. That's the Old Town pack. And then I have the younger version, which is also tied into it, which is the Little Werewolf series. And they all do have some crossover.
Yeah, it sounds like the werewolves ran away with you for a little bit there.
Yeah, for a little bit. And then I went to the Agents of Asset series, which is my love letter to all things magic. I try and use as many magical creatures as I can.
Yes, magic, and especially magical creatures. That's a favorite of mine. I really enjoy not only magic systems, but monsters and things, obviously. I think I mentioned this before when I was on your show.
Magic is hard, though, because you can write yourself into a corner sometimes when you create a magical system. And you have a character existing within this magical system, playing by the rules of that magical system. And let's say you get to book 3, which did happen for me. And you have a plot point that you've got to hit. It's on your target, and it goes against what you've originally created for your magic system. You have to find a complete workaround because you can't bypass the system you created. You have to work within it.
That's why I like to have multiple systems, kind of thing. And I like that, especially multiple kind of simple systems, though, not like Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, for example. I mentioned him before, but Mistborn has like 2 systems that kind of interact with each other as the main systems, maybe 3 even. And but each of those is actually pretty complex too, because Sanderson, I think, kind of overdoes it a little bit with that. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but he does a lot of detail with his magic systems, and I think that's cool, and I like to do that. But I also like to have some systems that are a little more airy. You know, they got a little less hardness to them. You know,
flexibility in what you can and can't do.
Yeah, flexibility.
And that's
right,
kind of the problem I ran into is my main character in the Agent of Asset series is from a race of magical creatures that are 100% magic neutral. Magic does not work on them. It can't help them. It can't hurt them. It can't trick them. So when they're supposed to be seeing through, let's say, a glamour, they actually see whoever's right there. They don't see, what they're pretending to be. And so as I was writing the story, I actually needed the main character to have been fooled, but it can't be done by magic. So I had to figure out normal ways to fool this person because they could see through anything that's magical.
Oh, that's actually kind of cool. And that brings it a little back down to earth, I bet, like actual disguises or something like that,
Yeah, and it's fun to kind of play with the irony of that they're in the magical world, but they can't use any magic systems at all in order to do what they need to do. In fact, everything magical works against them.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of curious about this because I've noticed this as kind of maybe not a trend, but I've noticed a lot of books that I've looked into now recently. My friend Paul Sading is doing something like this too. He's got his main character in his urban fantasy series that's coming out, I believe, in July, is a demon, but he's the only demon who doesn't have magic. It's that kind of thing, that. There's a bunch of other ones I've read like that, and I think there was one of the early Xanth books. The guy did end up having magic, but he didn't think he did.
So a lot of times we run into characters that they find out they have magic, and then they become overpowered. But what if your magic is the fact that it doesn't work? You don't actually have an active power. You have to still work with your street smarts. You still have to work with what you've got. Yeah. Even though there's magic all around you. It's kind of a nice twist.
And I think the nice thing about it is that it puts the reader in there as it's like an identification kind of marker. Okay, this character's like you. What would you do if you were in that situation? Kind of thing can be a, in a way, can be part of it anyway. Probably not the whole thing, because obviously the character's not going to be exactly like the reader, and they're going to have different capabilities and stuff.
Well, they can still see all the cool stuff that humans can't see, but they just can't do anything about it.
Yeah, you can see through all those illusions. It's just basically a magic in its own right. It's just
there's one scene where it's in the first book, so it's not a spoiler, where the character is coming into her own. Her power, so to speak, or lack of power, is being awakened, and she's always called her boss a troll. And her boss actually becomes a troll right in front of her face. And she flips out because she's never seen this before. And her boss is literally the troll she's been calling her.
Oh, oh, that's perfect. I love that. That's so funny. And does this troll then? No need to spoil. But this troll does not, I assume, intend to eat her immediately because he can't. He either can't tell or he's always been a troll.
No, she's not an evil, human eating troll. But I think she does fire her. So
there you go. Still not a nice troll by any means.
No, not at all.
Yes. I'm. That's one of the nice things about being a writer, though, is you don't have a boss to fire you most of the time.
Well, you do have readers, though, and they can leave some pretty interesting reviews.
That's true. Those can get pretty colorful. I've not yet experienced a whole lot of them. I don't think I've gotten a 1-star anytime recently. I think I've gotten maybe a 1-star on one of the audiobook that I had produced because I'm not sure if it was my fault or not. I haven't looked at that one.
My favorite 1-star review that I've ever gotten was just a simple one line, and it said, "This book sucks as much as vampires do." I was like, "That's cute."
Yeah, it's a nice little 1-star. I mean, come on. It's like a vampire with a broken fang, 1 fang, 1 star.
Oh.
Anyway. That makes me think. I mean, I don't write about vampires generally, but that'd be a funny like a kid's book, vampire, like a picture book.
Snaggletooth vampire.
Exactly. He's got 1 fang.
Oh.
It's 1 fang to drink blood with. I don't think that would necessarily fly, but I mean, how could you have drinking blood in a kid's book? I don't think that's going to happen.
No, not a kid's book.
Not in like a picture book. I mean, maybe like an adult picture book. Anyway.
There you go.
You have to sleep. Anyway. Yeah, so you also do Spilling Ink, and I gotta say that show's really fun. I was just on it recently, and it's quite a lot like this one, except that there's more people involved, so there's less me in it. Generally, even on the episodes where I would appear, episode when I appeared. But anyway, I just gotta say that was a really cool experience going on there, and so thanks for that. But I wanted to point people in that direction because I've been thinking about non-human creatures more lately. All sorts of, well, not just non-humans. I mean, we were just talking about a troll, but magical creatures, aliens, that kind of stuff. And because when I was a kid, especially, I thought that was the coolest part of every story I read. It's like, okay, The Hobbit. Okay, there's basically no humans in this book. Great, perfect. That was probably one of the reasons that was one of my favorite books when I was younger. But do you have I guess is there an advantage that you see to humans? I mean, I have some that I can think of, but to using human characters that are really human, like we were talking about before, kind of thing, like where the magic is limited or whatever.
I always have a twisted viewpoint when I write stories. Instead of the typical monsters being monsters, I tend to humanize the monsters and demonize the humans. So a lot of times I show the worst of humanity. For example, in my Chronicles of the Uprising series, I start off telling you that the apocalypse happened and all the creatures had to come out of the woodwork to band together to exist. They had to survive. And as soon as survival happened and they were starting to rebuild, the humans turned on the vampires and all supernatural creatures and enslaved them.
Wow.
And by the time the book actually starts, humans use vampires like the Romans did with the gladiatorial arenas. They use them for blood sport and as entertainment because who cares if you kill a vampire? They're not human. And then I tell you the story from the vampire's perspective as a freedom fighter trying to escape this.
Oh, that's so cool. And the Vampire Coliseum type thing, vampire blood sports. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tend to twist the narrative a little bit, and I tend to show monsters or typically monster type creatures as more human.
Right. It's interesting. That reminds me of, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is kind of the play it straight where the monsters, they often do become victims of but they're all horrible, basically. The monsters are all real bad guys in that show. And then in Angel, the demons and vampires are, spoiler alert, not always the bad guys, which I really like.
It goes back to when I first started reading, and when I was a teenager, I was reading Anne Rice. And she was the one I fell in love with because she gave the vampires lives. They weren't just mindless, blood-sucking creatures. They had lives. They had things they wanted to do. They had things that drove them on. And I liked that, and I wanted to explore that more. And the books that I would pick up after that tended to fall in that same, type of feeling. Whereas the creatures themselves have their own lives. They have their own reasons for existence and the reasons they do what they do.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a really interesting. I keep saying interesting. I am really aware of my tics today, but I really like that, because if you don't have an internal world for a creature that's supposed to be smarter than a human, even, or at least as smart as a human, right? A vampire, or I was going to say a lich, an undead and wizard, whatever. Any of these characters, an elf, these guys, these creatures are going to be more. They're going to have internal worlds. They're going to do stuff. They're going to want stuff up there for themselves, and it's not always going to be dependent on what humans want. I mean, traditionally with vampires, you got this orientation, right, where they're looking at humans because they want to eat them, basically, or they want to turn them into vampires, and that's got to be challenging, I'd imagine, to kind of counteract that, to go against that a little bit with your writing, or at least twist it, like you said.
Yeah, and I think in my first outing as an author in the Immortalis series, I did have my vampires capable of killing people, but they had a moral compass. So while, yes, they did kill humans, they selected them. They weren't just a random person off the street. It was generally somebody who would deserve it.
Ah, yeah. Oh, so almost like vigilante vampires.
Kind of, yeah.
Oh, neat. Sounds like you have definitely put some interesting twists in there. In a lot of your books, it sounds like. I mean, if not, I can assume all your series so far you've mentioned have some kind of twist like that.
That's the goal, though, I think, for us as authors is, the old saying that every story that can be told is already told. So it's a matter of how you tell a story. How do you add your personal twist to it? How do you approach it from a different angle? And that's what we have to do as authors. We have to find a way to tell a story as uniquely as possible.
Yeah. I would almost go so far as to say that originality for the sake of originality is kind of crass. And it's nice. It can be really beautiful, but it's challenging for a reader sometimes, and it's also extremely hard to actually process as a writer. You're trying to do all this other stuff, make a fun story. So just trying to create an original setting or original plot is kind of almost wasted effort sometimes. Would you agree or disagree with that?
No, I agree with you. And I think the goal when we write stories is to balance familiar elements with original elements. So you're not just 100% throwing new at everybody. You're giving them something they're already grounded in and then showing them it in a new light, taking it from a different angle. But that way they can kind of ease into it and they're not shocked by, something that they didn't expect at all. I mean, take, for example, the Twilight series, which everyone loves to laugh at. It's sure. Something we're used to. It's vampires, right?
Yeah.
It's plays by some of the rules, but then it gives us that weird twist of sparkling vampires.
Yeah.
Which we can laugh at because it's definitely out in left field, but it was memorable. But she didn't just throw a 100% new creature at us. She still followed other vampire rules. So we can kind of understand it a little better. Even though we think it's funny, there's still some grounding for her vampires. We still see them as vampires, even though they have some kind of quirky traits.
Right. People will split hairs about, that's not really a vampire at that point. I know nerds will do that all the time, right? But
my favorite meme is the one where I think it's Lestat and Louis, and it's them snickering together, and they say something about vampires don't sparkle or something like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's actually a novel. Yeah, there's a novel called Vampires Don't Sparkle by Chris Fox out there. I haven't read it, but that's a good title. It was too good that somebody was going to get it at some point, But
even to this day, though, Twilight is a very memorable series.
Right.
She did something right.
Yeah, absolutely. Even like the sparkling it may be weird to people. Maybe they'll go, that's the vampires shouldn't sparkle or whatever, grumble, act like Napoleon's veterans or whatever and complain because you're allowed to. But then you don't, you don't want to, but it's silly because the books still, they did well, you know, they did absurdly well. Let's be honest here, people. We should all be so lucky as to have a series that sells that well. But on the other hand, not on the other hand, whatever. But I guess the point is that just because something is a little, I'll go out on a limb and say that sparkling vampires are a little silly, but but like you said, they follow she did that to help them follow the other rules for vampires, right? Like, you know, okay, so the other parts will then make sense for a different reason, which is how you make a twist in the first place. You know, if you want to twist a creature, like, okay, it's a vampire. Why does he drink blood? Does he need blood to survive? Well, maybe not. Maybe he needs blood for something else. You know, for example, as another vampire one. There's all sorts of stuff you can do with just twisting a simple thing like that. And I've definitely been guilty of just making things that are weird for the sake of weird. And I gotta say, it's not as rewarding as it first seemed it would be.
Why not?
Oh, because partially because it's just such a challenge to actually write like a universe with no planets or stars in it, or, you know, I don't know. That's probably the weirdest one. The one that's actually the hardest to write was the Pillar universe. Mm. But I had a few other ones or a one that where we're going to switch between points of view because people now experience other people's thoughts sometimes and experiences independently of each other. It's weird. That was the Mangrove Suite was my novella where I did that, and I had a couple sequels to that too. So just for your listeners paying attention, in case you're wondering. So yeah, anyway, we're running a little bit low on time though, and I have rambled a little much. Sorry about that. But what have you been reading lately?
Actually, I am trying to finish the All Souls trilogy, and I say trying because even though we're stuck at home right now, I don't manage to have a few quiet hours of the day to read. And this book series, every single one of the books is like 600 pages.
Wow.
And so I've only made it halfway through the first book, which is called A Discovery of Witches.
Oh, okay. I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a TV show. Then that's actually what got me onto it, which I love when TV shows are based off of book series because I'll watch the show and then I'll go, where I need the books now. And then I'll compare the two. And it's interesting because while it is, I would consider a paranormal romance, it focuses a lot on the politics between three classes of creature, the demons or the daemons, the vampires, and the witches. And so there's a lot of interspecies dynamics, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, no kidding. No, that sounds. I have not picked that one up. For one thing, I'm a slow reader, as the listeners will attest. But I do. I've heard a lot of good things about that series. So interesting. I did not heard the series name before, though. Apparently,
the author is an actual historian, so a lot of her facts are actually correct. So she's really blending the real world in with her fantasy world, which is fun. And the plot line, at least of the first one, and again, I haven't finished the first book yet. I'm still getting through it. Centers around this manuscript. It's an actual manuscript that's gone missing, an alchemical text that might pose the answer to the origins of these three creatures, and they all want that book for different reasons.
Oh, that's neat. Great. I love a premise like that. You know, following a book. That's just a book within a book, you know?
Right,
but it's a real book. That's kind of a couple layers there, if you know what I mean.
And it's fascinating. And while it does have the romantic elements, that's not the center of the story. There's so much more to it, which is what is kind of the way I write. So I like reading the same books that I would be writing.
Oh, yeah, I hear that. I do enjoy a good fantasy adventure too, or fantasy romantic adventure. That's really where my bread is buttered at the moment. I like to have a little bit of romance in there. Mostly, it's about the weirdness and the adventure, you know. For me, anyway. So that's cool, Katie. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. This has been fun.
Let people know where they can find your books and where they can find Spilling Ink.
All right. Well, I'm actually super easy to find online. Look me up by name, Katie Salidas. That's KatieSalidas.com. And on my main page, you have links to everything, including my a la carte publishing, consulting services, Spilling Ink, my Facebook, Twitter. Everything is in one place. as well as the links to find my books on any of the ebook platforms or purchase them direct from Barnes & Noble or Amazon or what have you.
Excellent. That sounds turbo convenient.
Right?
Everyone wants to check out your stuff.
I'm all about simple and easy.
Excellent. As for this podcast, you can find more of us at mentalcellarpublications.com. That's Cellar with a C, CELLAR, publications.com. And the word mental before that. I'm terrible. Anyway, look us up there. You can. This podcast is hosted by Libsyn. And also, you can find my books on Amazon.com. Currently, they're pretty much all exclusive, but we will be getting paperbacks up on all the sites now that I'm a member of the Draft to Digital beta for print. Yes. Going to be distributing through there pretty fast. And so the latest book is Orphan Mage, but by the time this podcast comes out, Shadow Prince should be right around the corner. And and that's the sequel to Demon Scroll. So thanks for listening, everybody. Talk to you next week.
That tears it.